The scraping of limbs, broken legs across a hard stone floor, the dim torchlight illuminating the fresh blood newly spilled, and finally, the clattering of the barely conscious Druj het being thrown to the floor. The room span. Pain had become a primary feeling of his very existence by now. He could not tell which of his limbs were broken anymore, just that none of them were still functional. Shapes and silhouettes flickered from the narcotic haze he was still under. Was this real life now, or another nightmarish psychedelic vision? Silently, the head stared blankly across the room. Perhaps the torture was finally over. The punishment for his attempted takeover of his clan finally atoned for. Maybe this was a nice, safe prison cell, away from the rusty scalpels and murderous sickles of the Khalad. But as he heard the ominous footsteps descend, what could only be a throne fit for none other than a member of the Buruk Temple, any such hope died swiftly. With what would be the last of his strength, he looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the dim torchlight. The fearsome image of an orc, draped from head to toe in skulls and bones, with the stature of a mountain, a black fur pelt from one of the Mallum's many beasts draped over his shoulders. His bald head supporting a bushy grey beard that told of great wisdom, accompanying eyes which had seen countless other orcs in the same position as this het, and felt no mercy. And all dealt with in the same way, a brutal example made, as a grim reminder of the absolute power of the Buruk Temple, the true rulers of Druj society. The clans. The Druj are a large nation, spread over the territories of the Mallum. Like the other great barbarian threats, the Jotun and the Grendel, they are split into many distinct clans. The Druj clans are large extended informal groups, with loose family links, who live together in a region or territory. They appear to compete with each other for prestige and wealth, but the Buruk Temple ensure that they form a united front against external threats. In the same way that the Jotun favour powerful beasts, and the Grendel make use of imagery of the sea and the seashore, the Druj use poisonous or cunning animals as their totems. A clan is led by a chieftain, generally chosen by the Buruk Temple. Depending on the nature of the clan, the chieftain may be required to pass a series of grueling tests, or might be required to assassinate the current chieftain to seize the role. Although an assassin who does not have the support of the Buruk Temple rarely keeps the position for long. The most powerful clans each command one of the Druj armies, who march and fight under the clan's banner. Less powerful clans support the Druj armies, with bands of warriors similar to the independent captains of the empire. The Buruk Temple. The Buruk Temple are the true rulers of Druj society. Each is a master of herb lore, heir to the centuries of accumulated study and experimentation with herbs and potions. Their exact numbers are unknown, but it is believed that every major clan of the Druj is ultimately dominated by one of the Buruk Temple. Scholars estimate their number at between a dozen and a score at any given time. Little is known for sure of the Buruk Temple. They are almost never encountered directly by Imperials, and do not appear on the battlefields, preferring to exert their influence from behind the scenes. They appear to use the Temple as their agents and servants. These lesser apothecaries and physics are commonplace in Druj society, and often fight alongside the armies, either to support the Druj forces or to watch over them, and most importantly, so that they can report any failures back to their masters in the form of the Buruk Temple. The most powerful Temple appear to be apprenticed directly by the Buruk Temple, receiving scraps of lore from them in return for carrying out their orders. It is apparent that the Buruk Temple have extensive mastery of the art of the apothecary, and it is often claimed they know recipes unknown to Imperial lore. It is even possible that they have access to potent herbs that remain undiscovered in the Empire. The marshes of the Mallum are home to many strange plants and creatures. It is not impossible that things are living there completely unknown to Imperial lore. The Buruk Temple and their herb lore appears to be linked to deeper mysteries related to the Druj religious beliefs. There are some unsubstantial claims that the masters of herb lore use secret techniques to travel to a place called the Farthest Shore, apparently a reference to the Howling Abyss itself, where they meet to agree the future of the Druj people. It is unclear if references to the Howling Abyss are literal or metaphorical in nature. Ghulai. Ghulai are an oddity in Druj society, a caste of secretive ritual magicians who allegedly pay only lip service to the domination of the Buruk Temple. Imperial scholars believe that the Ghulai are comparatively recent in development, a response to the growing power of the sinister apothecaries who run Druj society. Each Ghulai is believed to be a powerful ritualist, generally specializing in the laws of spring and night, although many wield winter magic as a deadly weapon against their rivals. They are understood to collect magic items that can further enhance their ritual skills and casting abilities. Whilst their powers are considerable, the Ghulai are rarely seen on battlefields or in areas close to Imperial forces. Each Ghulai is supported by a coven of apprentices over whom they wield unquestioned authority. They keep a close eye on these apprentices, aware that the most likely people to challenge them are those closest to them. The Ghulai do not view the realms in the same fashion as Imperial magicians. Instead, they speak in terms of 6 powerful spirit totems, who embody the nature of the supernatural realms, and are served by the lesser spirits, or as known to the Imperials, the Eternals, which are bound to them in some fashion. It is not clear how literally the Ghulai take this belief, but there is some evidence that most Eternals go along with this perception when dealing with the Druj. The main magical tradition of Ghulai magic involves the practice of bone casting, using etched skulls of dead magicians or champions. The older the skull, the more accomplished the individual it came from. The more potent it is deemed as a magical tool by the Ghulai. While skulls appear to be the favoured use in ritual magic, other bones are used by the Ghulai as well. It is believed that different bones have different specific meanings in their system of magic. Some arcane scholars have tentatively suggested that this bone casting may have parallels with blood magic. though rarely in the presence of actual practitioners of this tradition. The Druj make extensive use of herbs both magical and mundane. In addition to the traditional herbs and potions found in the Empire, their warriors and Tepal often wield weapons that have been treated with mundane but effective venoms cultivated from the poisonous beets of the Mallum swamp. Warriors who take the field against the Druj often suffer deadly infections from the wounds they receive, and these often need to be treated by a skilled physic. Their Tepal are also skilled with ingested poisons. Most Tepal can create poisons that will induce symptoms from mild nausea to long-lasting weakness, all the way to a slow, agonizing death. Poisoning their guest is a common way for the Druj to initiate treacherous hostilities. It is very unwise to break bread with them. The herb lore of the Buruk Tepal is known to outshine even the mastery of the Tepal. There is good evidence that they are using it to create the disease and sickness that they can then use as weapons, as with the recent case of Rykos Flux. They are also known to use narcotic drugs to enslave or destroy the will of prisoners, and warp their perception of their personalities, or even to produce monstrous spirits to advance their wicked agenda. Like the tortured souls seen in the recent Rykos campaign. It is also almost certain that they are responsible for the creation of the miasma encountered at the same time. Conquest. The Druj seem intent on the conquest of all of their neighbours. In addition to countless invasions of the Empire over the centuries, they are known to have subjugated the orcs of the Barrens and have been involved in military campaigns against Axos. According to their own lore, they claim to be the original occupiers of what is now known as modern-day Dawn and Highguard. The details are unclear, but they seem to be driven by some religious zeal to retake these lands. There have been numerous ceasefires and peace treaties over the years, but there has never been any suggestion that a permanent accommodation might be made with these marsh-born devils. It appears that the only thing that they will accept is the eradication or conquest of any and all of their neighbours. Druj domination is a terrible thing to experience. They have a well-deserved reputation for barbaric cruelty, using public acts of execution and torture to break the will of those that they conquer. Like all the barbarian orcs, they take slaves, but even the other orcs seem to regard the Druj as unusually cruel masters. Those who submit can expect a short life, tolling ceaselessly in chains to produce food for their Druj overlords. The slightest sign of resistance is swiftly and brutally crushed, and the Druj are quite prepared to make a point of executing groups of random slaves for the actions of one single rebellion. Acquiescence is not sufficient to ensure one's survival. In the years when Rykos was under control of the Druj, individuals were often taken to random strongholds, where the Buruk Tepal would perform sinister experiments on them with a plethora of toxic herbs. There was no pattern to their choices. The young and old, the healthy and the sick, all were subject to these coals. Some claim that the Druj had a twisted plan to weaken highborn bloodlines. The more prosaic interpretation is that they are simply incapable of ruling except through fear and terror. Subject nations. The Druj hold many smaller nations by the neck, sending them into battle ahead of their own forces. The Druj are apparently viewed with dread by these nations, even fearful of displeasing their masters and the ruthless cruelty that will descend should they dare to betray them. Despite this, they can express unpredictable levels of magnanimity, rewarding members of smaller nations who serve them well or succeed in a particularly grueling mission. Their very unpredictability helps them to maintain their position of power. Many Imperial soldiers who think they have fought the Druj have actually fought members of a subject nation, perhaps supported by a few small units of Druj warriors who seek to exploit the chaos of the battlefield to strike at their opponents before withdrawing. In 379 YE, the subject nations in the Barrens rebelled against their Druj overlords. 3 entire armies rebelled, and all Druj forces in the Barrens were crushed. Freed from the Druj oppression, the Orcs declared the Barrens to be their homeland, and attempted to negotiate an alliance with the Empire, but were unsuccessful. They were successful in destroying the Druj fortification in the east, but failed to take the Towers of the Dawn. They were ultimately defeated by a combination of Imperial forces attacking from the west and Druj forces from the east. Some fled the Barrens to take up residence in Farunin, while others were returned to subjugation by the conquering Druj. Tortured souls. During the Rykos campaign, the Druj utilized a previously unseen weapon, tormented highborn prisoners transformed into unliving horrors. Never many in number, the creatures were destroyed during one of the climactic battles of the Rykos campaign, when Imperial heroes were able to lay their spirits, finally, to rest. Imperial scholars have pieced together some of the details of how these tragic entities were created. They were originally highborn citizens who had been captured and enslaved by the barbarians and subjected to horrific torture and malice. Through the use of twisted ceremonies and powerful infusions of unknown herbs, the Druj twisted the very spirit of their victim and set them to stalk the battlefields, spreading shadows of the despair and hatred that constantly racked them. The Druj seem to have selected their victims for this grim transformation exclusively from those who were strong-willed, physically powerful cataphracts, or guardians, and the battle priests who had fallen into their hands. The resulting creatures were skilled warriors, but also possessed the ability to deliver withering spiritual injuries to their former Imperial allies. They also proved extremely difficult to destroy, requiring a priest to exorcise them to prevent them from rising once again. Even this exorcism could not permanently banish these creatures. The same entities were then encountered later, several times throughout the course of the Rykos campaign, bearing the same pain-racked faces as before. War beasts. On occasion, the Druj may herd rabid beasts ahead of them in battle. These dangerous creatures are native to the Mallum, the Druj's marsh homeland. Fortunately, the Druj lack the skills of the Kraken's jaws, the elite Grendel Moradin that lead literal animals into battle that they have trained from birth. Instead, they are forced to use magical rituals and Solomon's elixirs to calm these beasts to the point that they can be herded onto the battlefield. Over centuries of engagements, the Empire has encountered a veritable menagerie of Druj war beasts, drawn from the depths of the Mallum. These have included dire insects, swamp-dwelling drakes, the poisonous Oduli, as well as the marshlings and large marsh walkers. Once a fight begins, the Druj release the animals and drive them towards their enemy, foregoing any great control or direction over them, and seemingly unconcerned should the beast be killed in battle. Although drugged, some creatures can still be deadly as they lash out at those who they are herded towards. Druj Miasma. The Shroud of Dread, or Druj Miasma, was first encountered by Imperial troops crossing into Rykos during the winter of 378 YE, the counter-offensive against the Orcs, but has since been encountered throughout the Mallum and in the attempt to liberate Zenith. Described as an almost physical pall of dread and despair, it infests the air, the water, the soil. It was described by those exposed to it in fanciful terms: clawing at the spirit, slowly grinding away every positive emotion, and threatening to undermine every last virtuous thought. At night, the effects of miasma are intensified. It seems to take advantage of the long hours of darkness to play upon natural fears, doubts, and uncertainties that come naturally to the mortal mind. Some exposed to miasma describe hallucinations, especially of deceased loved ones. There is no suggestion, however, that this effect is actually producing images of the dead. Several soldiers reported catching the sight of loved ones that they knew were alive and safe at home, but seemingly murdered and weeping. The Shroud of Dread significantly impacts Imperial efforts to liberate territories claimed by the Druj, slowing the advance of all armies and making it harder for them to claim any territory from the Eastern Orcs. The study of miasma. Druj miasma is not fully understood by the Imperial scholars. It does not appear to have been created with conventional ritual magic. Rather, it bears more similarity to a massive consecration associated with the malign spiritual practices of fear or dread. Yet the existence of a magical method to deal with the aura, coupled with Orc inability to use Liao in ceremonies, points to it being more than a purely spiritual effect. Of particular interest is the fact that the miasma appears to have little or no effect on the Druj Orcs themselves. Whether this is due to some property of the miasma, or because the Druj are desensitized to its fearsome effects that makes up the Shroud of Dread, neither of which is clear. It is notable that the Druj's subject septs are not inured to its influence. Even those who have lived their entire lives under its effects still continue to feel the clawing dread of Druj miasma. There is a significant speculation that the aura is useful to the Druj in more than simply slowing the advance of Imperial forces. It also contributes to the atmosphere of terror and despair the Orcs create both among their human prisoners and conquered septs, making it harder for their slaves to rebel against their authority. Miasma Pillars. While the aura spreads across the entire territory, it is anchored by a misshapen stone monolith dubbed a miasma pillar. Each region of the territory will contain at least one such pillar. The pillars appear to reinforce or supplement one another when they are in close proximity to each other, and in this case, removing the power of a single pillar proves to be ineffective if there are other pillars nearby to pick up the slack. All nearby pillars need to be deactivated simultaneously. If a single pillar is deactivated, there is little noticeable effect on the local miasma. Once all of the pillars in a location are deactivated, however, the miasma quickly fades from the region. Unsurprisingly, the Druj often take pains to ensure that the pillars in a region are well defended. When they were first encountered, destroying miasma pillars prevented a significant challenge for both those engaged in breaking their power and the soldiers protecting them. While miasma is unpleasant in the wider territory, the miasma pillars themselves are surrounded by an aura of dread in its most primal form. Even approaching a miasma pillar can prove extremely difficult without significant precautions, such as a ceremonial anointing. The use of a ritual protection, such as the crystal clarity of the rational soul, or the use of magical items, such as the circlet of falling snow. In early 380 YE, a combination of captains fighting to protect the legacy of Highguard, survivors motivated by the power of courage and the rampant power of the eternal Lothir. Most of the Druj miasma pillars in Rykos were located and destroyed. After the conquest of Ossium, the miasma pillars were quickly identified and destroyed by Imperial scouts and the agents of vigilance from the Vigilance Assembly. They proved to be more durable in Zenith. They were commonly protected by tortured souls, former Imperial champions twisted into service by the foul Druj magic, eventually requiring the intervention of both the Imperial Senate, the Granite Pillar, and the Highborn Assembly before the last one could be removed and the territory freed. There is evidence that both the Sarengrave and the Forest of Ulnak have miasma pillars, and it is assured that they are also present within the salt flats of Sanaf. It seems to take little time for the Druj to spread their miasma over a territory, and there are no signs of them starting to do so before conquering the entire area. The one place that they have controlled for an extended period of time without any signs of miasma is the Barrens, but it is not clear why. Some scholars have theorized that the territory was too large, but it is purely speculation. As with so much else about the miasma and the Druj themselves, as well as the territory now belonging to Dawn, it may remain a mystery. In each of the territories where the miasma has been cleared, a handful of lesser pillars still exist. Their influence is extremely limited, no more than a mile at most around an active pillar, but their effect no less potent. Destroying miasma pillars. Initially, the only way to destroy a miasma pillar was to use the consecration ceremony, a significant amount of liao, and priests capable of wielding it. In summer 379 YE, the Chimes of Annulment ritual was developed and codified at the Halls of Knowledge in Zenith, specifically to aid in the destroying of miasma pillars. Some have speculated that the Druj invasion of the territory and their subsequent foray into the Morrow that saw the halls destroyed were a reaction to the creation of the ritual. Although this seems unlikely. The Druj are petty, but to launch an entire military campaign to punish Urizen for creating a single ritual seems to be an extreme response, even for them. There is also the question of how they would even know it existed. In either case, the ritual was added to the body of Imperial law by declaration of the Imperial Conclave in 379 YE. A second ritual, the Dreadful Ending, was added to Imperial law in spring 385 YE. This winter ritual is much less subtle than the chimes of annulment, using brute force to shatter and tear whatever force that empowers the pillars. It's harder to use, but particularly effective at dealing with situations where there are multiple pillars in close proximity. The Eternals, Zakalwe and Janan, are known to despise the miasma and the pillars that anchor it. Zakalwe offered assistance during a major conjunction of the Sentinel Gate during the liberation of Zenith. Janan is known to have created some boons specifically to empower rituals intended to destroy the pillars, even though they are not part of the law of night magic. In more recent times, the Empire has saw several major victories over the Druj in the territories of Zenith and the Barrens. Having removed the Marsh Devil threat from these eastern lands, the last bastion of the Druj remains as their homeland, the unknown and uncharted lands of the Mallum, the heartland of the Druj, the home of the Buruk Tepal, and a land fraught with dangers. Many of these lands, such as the dark, unknown woods of the great forest of Ulnak, and the vast, uncharted salt flats of Sanaf, pose the next major stepping stones in the Empire's campaign to eliminate what some would call their most hated enemy. But there is one territory which has been mapped out by Imperial spy networks much more extensively than the others. The lands known as the Saran Grave. The Saran Grave is the southwestern territory of the Mallum. It borders Farunin, Zenith, Axos, and the Barrens, as well as the salt flaps of Sanaf. It absolutely teems with life, where Ossium was grim and dour, strangled with dark forests and twisted woodlands. The Saran Grave is wide open and full of life. It is bounded to the south by the mountains of the Moon and the peaks of Axos. There is a great deal of agriculture here, both crops and herd animals in great profusion. The great forest orcs speak of the Saran Grave in dark tones. They say that there is something corrupt in the marsh, a malignant presence that the Druj commune with. Some speculate that it is perhaps related to the terrible spirit that occupies the great ruins that lie along the Northern River, the river that feeds into Feverwater and Farunin. There are 3 clans of Druj in the Saran Grave. The south is dominated by the Thorn Wasp clan. The northern regions are controlled by the Banded Snake, and the eastern regions are under the control of the Marsh Lizard clan. These 3 powerful clans rule over a number of smaller clans of subject orcs and a few handfuls of humans. Economics. It is likely where the territory conquered by the Empire would experience a similar problem to those encountered with Ossium in regard to establishing communications and the like. The Sarin Grave appears on the surface to be a very fertile territory, perhaps even on par with parts of the Marches, and it is likely that farms would be readily established and prosper here. In recent history, the Druj are secure in their domination of the Sarin Grave. Until very recently, the territory was completely unknown to the Empire. The Great Forest Orcs were the first to name the place, when they provided what information they possessed to their Imperial allies. In summer 383 YE, however, a spy network was commissioned here by the Imperial Senate. Thanks to a joint effort between the Penumbra Watcher, Imperial military captains, and Aksu scouts, the territory was carefully infiltrated, explored, and mapped in the run-up to the winter solstice of that year. The information here was made public after the summit. The Aksu contingent was composed of toxitized skirmishers, many of them magicians. These scouts cooperated fully with their Imperial counterparts, sharing information and coordinating their movements through the fens and forests. Two of them were accompanied by ghostly advisors, remnant spirits summoned by necromantia as part of an enchantment that helped guide the Aksu in their investigation of the territory. The Aksu have the same information as is provided here. Points of interest: Miasma pillars. The entire territory is within the grip of Druj miasma, the oppressive aura of despair and fear that the orcs of the Mallum cultivate wherever they establish their dominion. It causes nightmares and impedes efforts to conquer the territory. As with other Druj territories the Empire has encountered, the crushing atmosphere is supported by miasma pillars in each of the 7 regions. Trods. There are currently no Trods in Sarin Grave, although the presence of a Valorn heart here no doubt means the Navarre will be keen to establish some. Biental Dol, the corrupting spirit that the Great Forest Orcs speak of, is almost certainly the Valorn that lurks in the heart of the Sarin Grave. There is little doubt that this is the location of the ruins of the Terunial city of Biental Dol. Obviously, the Imperial Scouts find it difficult to do more than identify the outskirts of the area, so the presence of the ruins is much up to speculation. There is even more speculation about why the Valorn is not significantly larger there. There are no Navarre among the spies studying the Sarin Grave, but some of the Aksu have experience of the immense Valorn that occurs in the heart of their own nation. They say there's no sign that the Valorn has ever been any bigger than it currently is. The best guess of their magician scouts, it has something to do with the peculiar stones that serve as a boundary around the central region. The Druj, for their part, tend to just avoid the place. There are a few settlements, other than Grimbor, in the Nesuzak forest, that are especially close to the borders, and no signs of any steadings or permanent stridings within. The Tower of the Skink. There is a very large fortification of white granite and twisted weirwood in the Fawn Fen. It isn't built in the pass that connects the Sarin Grave and Axos, but it still defends the territory from invasion. The Druj city of Cephals sprawls within the shadow of this large castle. The Palace of the Sleepers. In northern Kroll is the Palace of the Sleepers, a peculiar, almost conical hill riddled with passages and shrouded in twisted trees, and an enduring cloak dirty mist. It stands on the edge of a great dark-watered lake, and the local populace give it a wide berth. There's also a strange statue of a giant multi-armed horror next to the slumped conical mound, right on the edge of the lake. It is tricky to get close to the structure, as there are some particularly horrible creatures living in the marshes that have not been encountered anywhere else. A breed of large carnivorous multi-armed horror, similar to a miniature kraken. They seem to grow no more than 6 feet long. An amphibious lizard, similar to a crocodile or alligator, that seems to possess a supernatural ability to sneak up on its prey without detection. Those spies with magical awareness suspect that there is an aura here reminiscent to the ritual dripping echoes of the fen, but on a much smaller scale. The orcs are not alone here. There are a noticeable number of human slaves, and the spies believe they are primarily of recent Urizen and Aksu origin. As difficult as it is to believe some of the spies, the Palace of the Sleepers appears to be a college of magic, dedicated to the study of either night or spring realms. It's possible to get much of a feel for it, but the Aksu agree. The Gulai here are studying and developing magic, and whatever else they may be up to. The Fingers of the Devourer. In the western Whisperwood is a rich weirwood forest. The trees themselves are a little peculiar. They have a sinuous quality not seen in other forests, with drooping curved branches. There's no doubt they are actually weirwood, but they seem particularly adapted to living in the damp soil from which they sprout. Estimates suggest the forest provides roughly 20 rains of weirwood each season. It is not impossible that if they were in Imperial hands, it might provide more. Path of the Eye. The mountains in the southern Sarengrave provide an easy passage between Axos and the Mallum. The only route for armies to move between the two nations is the Path of the Eye, a broad pass which connects Thornfen and the Aksu territory of Kabanja. The regions of the Sarengrave. Nessustak Forest. Nessustak Forest is dark and unpleasant. It is dominated by the bandit snake clan, ruled from nearby Churin. But there are a few Druj settlements here. Most of the populace are made up of orc septs, with one obvious exception. The point where the river leaves the Valorn-infested region of the Bendel. There is a small town given over to predominantly humans who call themselves the Grinbor, which also seems to be the name of their settlement. The exact status of these Grinbor is hard to determine. They are surely subjects of the Druj, but like the Ketsov in Ossium, they seem to have a certain amount of freedom. They farm the forests for wood, but they also seem to farm the Valorn to the south. Small expeditions press into the infested region, braving the Miasma, apparently in search of treasures and peculiar plants for their Druj overlords. They also operate flat-bottomed boats that carry the lumber down the river. One particularly grim practice observed by the spies is that it seems whenever a Grinbor becomes sick or too old to work, they are offered up to the Valorn of Bendel. Some scouts were able to observe such a ceremony. There is a sense of pageantry about it, as if it were a sacrifice. Voluntarily, they would walk into the Valorn with neither weapons nor armor. As with all of the regions that border Bendol, Nessustak Forest shows signs of having been warped by Valorn power in the past, although there seems to be little evidence of Valorn spawn at the current time. After the storm of 384YE, the area bordering Farunin has become significantly more marshy, but for the most part, the waters spreading across the border were contained by Druj slave gangs. Fawnfen. The Fawnfen is controlled by the Marsh Lizard clan, and the heart of their territory is the sprawling town of Cephalus, which is by far the most significant settlement in the Sarengrave. A sprawling, stinking, almost city with a population on par with Mead. It squats in the shadow of the Tower of the Skink, an impressive fortified complex of white granite and twisted weirwood. The majority of the structures in Cephalus are of a wattle on daub construction, hovels for the countless slaves who serve under the whips of their masters. These are in stark contrast to a few buildings near the gate of the Tower of the Skink, built of limestone and ornamented with marble. Manors are equal in size and splendour to some of the finest of the League, the largest of which serves as both residence and workshop for the Buruk Tepel, Garnett, and their apprentices. There is a pass here through the mountains into northwestern Axos, the Path of the Eye, which is how the Druj are able to invade their foreign nations. Turin Flats. A sprawling, stinking marshland bisected by a slow-moving river that feeds into fever water. The flats are heavily farmed, primarily wild rice, tubers that flourish in the partially drained beds, caged fish and waterfowl, and herds of fat, pig-like animals that grow a thick, coarse wool. Slave villagers are scattered across the marshes, under the cruel fist of the banded snake clan. The ruler of Turin is a het of the banded snakes called Tracker, who is viewed with almost superstitious dread by the populace, and is known to take particular pleasure in acquiring captured Imperial soldiers and breaking them in body and soul. Healthy trade routes flow between the Turin Flats and the Salt Flats of Sanaf, all the way into the Barrens. Kroll. Apart from the Bendol, this is the wildest region of the Sarengrave. It is dominated by the Marsh Lizard clan, but part of it is held by an entirely different group of orcs, a cabal of Gulai called the Sept of Masks. They are based around a peculiar, almost conical hill called the Palace of the Sleepers, riddled with passages and shrouded in twisted trees and an enduring cloak of dirty mist. The rest of the region is given over to some light farming and scattered settlements belonging to the slaves of the marsh lizards. Some of these are involved in panning or sieving the marsh waters, especially those along streams or rivers that cascade down the mountains between Kroll and Axos. It is likely they are looking for precious metals, which might conceivably include some ilium. Bendol. This region is shunned by the Druj because it is occupied by a seething Valorn heart. There are believed to be Turonial ruins here, but the scouts so far have been unable to penetrate particularly far into that region for obvious reasons. Of particular interest is a series of misshapen stone that circle a particular region, several of them mired in the lake, which which bear carved designs somewhat reminiscent of curling Navarre patterns. There is no sign of any trots in the region, and the Valorn does not appear quiescent so much as contained. It is notable that parts of the marsh and forest, in all the regions that border Bendol, show signs of having been touched by the Valorn. There is no miasma, but the plants and some of the animals show signs of having been twisted by foul Valorn magic. Whisperwood. The borders of Whisperwood rise high into a great plateau, which borders the mountains of the moon, the isolated nation of Tsark. The woodlands are dominated by the Fawn Wasp clan of the Druj, who also control Bloodwater Marsh. In the western part of the region is a weirwood grove with the rather unsettling name of the Fingers of the Devourer, which seems to be the source of a lot of the Fawn Wasp clan wealth. The eastern parts of the region are given over to farms, but no less forested for it. The orcs practice an advanced form of agriculture that allows them to grow a variety of produce even in the shadow of the trees. There is a large settlement here, roughly in the middle of the region, which is named Euclid. The Fawn Wasp Palace squats in the centre of this settlement, and it is notable because unlike most Druj towns and villages, it has several tall towers, rather than being largely 1- and 2-story ramshackle buildings. Bloodwater Marsh. Grim fens and dour marshes and dozens of streams and rivers feed into Feverwater. There are a couple of Druj settlements here on the shores of the lake, mostly dedicated to fishing and the raiding of Farunin. This is where Druj forces invaded Zenith from. The largest settlement here is Lekev, along the eastern shores of Feverwater, close to the twisted Valorn of Bendol. A sept of orcs, who seem to take pride in emulating the Druj, are found here. They curry favour with their masters in the Fawn Wasp clan by scouting and raiding in Farunin and Zenith. Lekev has rotted docks, barely maintained enough to support the fisherfolk. There are signs that some buildings here are very old indeed.
Take from them their friends and loved ones. Make them watch as they are dismembered before them. Let them return to their cities and taverns, spinning their tales of their great victory. Let them sound the call to war. Let them charge headlong into our ranks. For the zeal that drives them to their prophesied victory brings only death and suffering in the end. They may take the land and recover, but the scars we leave them behind cut deeper than flesh and cannot be fixed by bandage nor herb. Their scars are felt at every glance over the shoulder in a dark passage, every sudden spike of adrenaline when a twig snaps behind them in the woods, when they shut their eyes every single night, haunted by the images and screams from those they could not save.
Thank you for listening to my reading of the lore and history of the Druj, one of the orc barbarian factions that exists within the world of the Empire Live role-playing game. This will hopefully be the first of many videos of this format, so any feedback would be appreciated, including which articles you'd like me to explore next. But until then, remember, that single lone orc in the bushes, who may look like an easy target for you and your fellow adventurers, may not be as alone as it seems. Until next time.